Hey, ambitious dentist, welcome to Start Your Dental Practice, the show for existing and aspiring dentists to take your dental practice to the highest possible level. I'm your host, Jonathan Van Horn, CPA and ABV, founder of dentistmetrics.com. In every episode, we aim to demystify the how to start a dental practice problem by bringing on world-class dentists, influencers, and consultants in the dental industry to pick their brain about how to get past the barriers involved from going from no practice to being a practice owner to owning your own successful dental practice.
You can have the best staff in the world, deliver the best patient experience possible, and have the perfect marketing plan, but still struggle to grow your practice. How? By choosing the wrong location. Look, I get it. It's not easy getting your location right when you're starting out. Properly understanding demographics is really tough. But fortunately, there's a way to give yourself the best chance to succeed. And today, I'm excited to share my conversation with public speaker and dental demographer Scott McDonald. He's the founder of Scott McDonald Associates and Dr. Demographics. Now, in our conversation, we dive really deep into the science of demographics and how they can make or break your practice. Even if you're happy where you're at, I know you'll get a ton out of this conversation. So here are just a few things you're going to learn. Number one, what most dentists get wrong about choosing where to start their practice and what to do instead. The 3 most common myths of choosing the right location for your practice. Why choosing a location with a lot of competition can help actually skyrocket your business. The best and worst locations to start your practice. The one thing that makes the dentist location viable. And at the end of the episode, you'll also find out where you can get access to Scott's bonus. You're not going to want to miss it. So be sure to listen all the way through this entire episode to get access to that. Now, just in case you're thinking, oh, this is about demographics, I'm not going to be doing a startup practice, so I don't need to know about this, and you are wrong. This is incredibly important for everyone that is going to be a dental practice owner, whether you're acquiring a practice, whether you're starting up a practice, or you're going to be joining a partnership or something similar. This is an important piece for you to hear, a really great interview. So listen in, and now here's my interview with Scott McDonald. Hello, ambitious dentist. Today I have with us the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Scott McDonald from Scott McDonald and Associates. He is a public speaker. He does a lot of things in dentistry, but most notably is also the owner of Dr. Demographics. He is a self-proclaimed, as well as, I guess he's not even self-proclaimed, the fact that he helps people all over the country at finding the right location for a dental practice. He is a dental demographer, and I hope I didn't slaughter that word with my Arkansas intellect. So Scott, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Hey, what a pleasure to be here.
So Scott, tell me your story. I mean, I know that usually when we're 3 or 4 years old, we don't grow up thinking, you know what I really want to do? I want to help find the place to put a dental practice.
Well, I did. Well, no, I'm kidding. Come on. Let me give you my background really quickly. I started off as a public relations executive and also as a newspaper writer for a while. And eventually I was hired by the California Dental Association back in the early 1980s. Now you have to remember, in 1977, the magic transition happened in which dentists were allowed to advertise. That was with the advent of the Bates-Osteen decision, which really was for lawyers, but applied to dentists. And the dental associations were trying to figure out, what the heck do we tell our members about advertising and about market research? So they tried to find somebody who was charming and good looking, but they hired me anyway, and I'm grateful for that. So ultimately, my job was to figure out what the numbers meant with regard to where you go. Now, just a quick little story on that. I started as their first marketing manager and worked for them for about 5 years, then started my own company. But one of the things that I found, the executive director required that the new members of the dental association had to go to dental school for a little while, just a week or two, to figure out what it is that dentists thought and where things came from. So we would listen to the lectures on practice management, and we'd talk to the students about what they thought. And I got to tell you, I found out that most dentists are being told absolute drivel about where to put practices, how to promote those practices. They were not in line with the prevailing theories of communications, advertising, public relations. They just had not a clue. So there are all these weird little things that they believed. It was kind of like a cottage industry. Hey, you know where you ought to go? You ought to go to, and they'd fill in the blank of a place that's really hot, but it's not based on any fact. It was
Medical
just rumor.
centers, big medical buildings with a bunch of doctors.
Totally. And so one of the things that I've been doing for almost 30 years is fighting the myths that a lot of dentists, particularly young dentists, hear about where to go and how to evaluate sites and how to promote their practices. I actually have the training, the schooling to do this. And over the years, I've picked up enough knowledge about the profession to say, this is what you want to be doing and what you ought to look for.
So what are some of those myths that are prevalent in the industry?
I'll give you a couple of obvious ones. One is that there is a myth that somehow you ought to put a practice where you have no competition. You know, if anybody ever comes to me and they say, I've discovered Shangri-La, Scott, you got to see this place. I go, really? Okay. No one's practicing there? No, there's no one. And I have to ask, first thing, what do you think it is? What's the first question you ask? Why? Why is no one practicing there? There's a reason. And so what you often find, the first thing when you're evaluating this is there usually is a good reason why not. It may be right next to an Indian reservation where they have 3 or 4 Indian Health Service dentists working, but they don't show up in the competition ratios. Sometimes it's the area is so dramatically poor or filled with people who have no interest in going to the dentist no matter what you do, short of putting a gun to their head. Mm-hmm. And anyway, the numbers of reasons go on, but what we found is if you don't have at least some competition, you better know why. The other thing is that there is some magic threshold that says there is a ratio of dentist to population that is an absolute solid. It's got to be this way. Mm-hmm. And that's not true either. Now, I'm sure you know this, Jonathan, but the average ratio dentist to population is about 1,200 to 1. And now we're talking about a suburban area, average population growth, which would be less than 0.9%. And there are facts about the place you can evaluate and say, all right, is there sufficient room for a new guy? But here's the thing people don't know. If you have a population full of very, very poor, very ill-educated people, you're going to need a ratio of 1 to 2,500 very often. If, on the other hand, the 2 magic ingredients to determine whether there's room for one more, it's income and educational attainment. Because people who are educated aren't necessarily smarter than other people, but what they are is they know how to plan ahead. They know to think about preventive care as a value. So you can actually go down to 800 to 1 or 900 to 1 and still have a successful practice. So that ratio, that magic number, isn't so true. You have to look at the other demographic variables to see, is that competition ratio making sense? Now, and one of those other third little things is how far will people drive or fly or travel to a dental office? That's called an isochrone, or an isochronic measurement is a time distance measurement. See, what a lot of people don't understand is there is a difference in Arkansas from Los Angeles or New York.
Yeah.
Now, will people travel a mile or 20 miles or 50 miles to get to a dentist? They will in some places, but they won't in others. And the variables are things like population density, how far they travel to get to a grocery store. You see, that has a direct relationship with how far is too far. Now, I don't mean to bore you. I know people's eyes glaze over when you start talking demography, but you see, there are all kinds of myths out there that dentists have that's unfair to them because no one's ever told them these are the numbers you need to know.
I promise you, the ambitious dentist audience is very, very much enjoying what you're talking about right now. One thing that I've spoken with people in the past that I see people seem to miss all the time is they'll do the demographics and they'll do the numbers based off of that, just that rule of thumb of, like say like, well, it's over 1,500, it's exactly 1,500 to 1. So it's got to be, a better than average location, but they go to that area and they don't realize that like they've got the competition that is there. Like if it's 4,500 people and there's 3 dentists there, and the people once they go in there, they don't realize that 2 of those dentists like just are the pinnacle of that culture of that town. They are at the top of the food chain because of the fact that they are so like they're on the city council, they're elders in the church, they're all like they have events every year, and that is a very misleading, if you go by just the number of dentists compared to the number of people in the town, that could be very misleading. That's on a very small scale, but even on a small scale, when you build that out into bigger areas, it just becomes even more important that you don't end up in a situation like that. Is that something that you guys look at?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Now, let me just kind of make sure that we understand. You probably have a few specialists listening, or people who aspire to be specialists.
Mm-hmm.
The variables that exist in a demographic character of a town vary according to the demography of the kind of practice that you're in. So let's talk orthodontics, for example. When we're evaluating a site for ortho, there's an entirely different group of people who'll go to an orthodontist and an endodontist. Mm-hmm. Yes, they're both dental specialists, but we evaluate the benefit of an orthodontic practice not based upon the 14, 15, 16-year-olds where you see most of your starts. Rather, you look at the 10 to 14-year-olds because that's your next group of people who are coming in. Mm-hmm. If there are insufficient number of 10 to 14-year-olds within an area, I don't care how many wonderful people there are that are 30. I don't care how fast they're growing or how wealthy they are. I care about, are you going to have enough people in that age threshold to make it? Same thing's true in endo. An endodontist or a periodontist, an oral surgeon, they're not looking for the same people. So you have to look at the age variables as well as the other factors to say, does this area have potential? Now, within general dentistry, of course, there's differences between each of the practices. You mind if I just tell you one thing that maybe a lot of people don't know about corporate dentistry?
Sure. Yeah.
You can identify a location that will say, this is a fantastic corporate dental location. But there are also locations that make terrible sites for corporate practice. And that's because there's a demographic variable that's different based upon the different types of practice. So the model has to match the people. And I'll go one step further. I'm getting enthusiastic because that's the kind of guy I am. Look, we have to look at the demographics of the doctor to say, is this the kind of doctor who's going to do really well in a site? Do you mind if I share a story?
Sure. That story's great.
Okay. There's a town, I shouldn't even mention, it's in California, Northern California.
Okay.
It's a little town near a resort community. And Sonoma is the town. Mm-hmm. The practice I'm talking about is not in Sonoma, so I'm not giving anything away.
Sure.
There was this guy who was a hugger. Now, have you ever met a hugger, a dentist who just hugs patients?
I've met women huggers. I've not met very many men huggers.
This guy was about 60 years old and just the friendliest, nicest guy ever. He was an elder in his local church, mm-hmm. very involved in the school board, had been on the school board a couple of terms. And the town had a disproportionately large number of older women who would come in. And they would come in and he would give them a little kiss in the cheek and he'd kind of rub their hump as they walked back to the chair. And he would ask them about their pets. He knew the names of almost every one of the pets of all of his clients.
Nice.
All of his patients. Now, this is the kind of guy who everybody loves. And when he sold the practice, they wept openly. Now, the guy who bought the practice was not from the area. He was from back east and kind of had a little bit of a fast-talking, kind of a schlick kind of a thing. And he assumed that the practice was going to be made up of people who wanted to drink fine wine. And he thought they were going to want to look at his art, his abstract art collection on the walls. Completely missed the point. Now, he didn't particularly like people. He was not a people person. He was a very fine clinician and assumed that's all he needed. But you see, the difference between the styles and the character and the goals of each one of those doctors was so different. He asked me, should I buy the practice? I said, don't buy the practice. He said, I like the practice. Don't buy the practice. He said, you know something? I think this is going to be great for my fine wine and abstract art crowd I want to attract. Well, he calls me 2 weeks after buying it and says, Scott, I've got to get out of here. They hate me, and worse, I hate them. Now, it's not as though they weren't good clinicians. Mm-hmm. But even the demographic and the psychographic character of the doctors was so different, sometimes it's not a good fit. Had a young guy who was a Japanese-American, third-generation American, didn't speak any Japanese, but he had a Japanese last name, wanted to open in Koreatown in Los Angeles. He said, we're all Asians, what's the problem? Well, World War II was the problem, and some people still remembered not very happily the Japanese occupation. Did terribly. Had to sell the practice at a loss. It was a simple matter of demographic
Disparity almost,
if you will. It just doesn't work all the time. Yeah, believe it or not, I do take that into account. And that's why I'll direct some young people in one direction and not another. I'm sorry, I've been talking too much.
No. I love what you're saying. So one thing that you've said that really sparks something in my mind is, a lot of the people, whenever they're in this industry and they're thinking about starting practices, or when I say start practices, everybody always says, so you help startup practices? Like, no, I don't help just startup practices. I help people that are acquiring practices as well. Actually, probably the majority are acquisitions. But I consider it starting a practice when you walk in and become a new owner of some new business. You're starting your practice at that point. So, but I see so few people doing demographics reports on acquisitions. So you're saying that you feel like that as an important step is to do a demographic report as well, kind of like to do a demographic analysis in an acquisition as well?
Sure, absolutely. Now look, if you're going to start up an area, you have to see, is it viable? Mm-hmm. And that's the first question about any practice that you're starting up. If it's viable in terms of the transition, you still need to know that too. And the simple fact is, most practices are between 3 and 5 zip codes large. And that's the average practice. About 80% of the patient base comes from 3 to 5 zip codes. Mm-hmm. The older a practice is, the more zip codes it'll have. Some of them have as many as 20.
Okay, I get that.
If you're drawing from 20 zip codes and you're selling the practice, as soon as the new owner comes along, what he's going to realize is the practice will contract. Mm-hmm. Because you see, a person may have been happy to travel 15, 20 minutes, even half an hour to go see their old buddy. Now, they used to live near the practice, but they moved. But you see, and that's why the practices continue to grow in size. But you see, if this guy, new doctor, they don't know who he is, they don't know who she is, they're going to care a lot about how far they have to go. It's much, much more important. So the practice will contract down to that 3 to 5 zip codes. If you don't think that there's going to be sufficient population to support the practice in that area, you got a problem. The viability of the practice site isn't there. Mm-hmm. I will go one step further, though. I'm even suggesting that people who are taking a job as an associate seriously have to consider the demographics of their employer. Now you go, well, why? Because, Jonathan, you know that how many times it happens that a new dentist will join a practice and the hiring doctor really is assuming that this kid's job is to make me rich. They're going to work their hearts out. They're going to build the value of my practice. And then after they've done that, I'm going to sell the practice to them. Won't that be profitable? Maybe you know something about that as a CPA. But I'm just saying. So unless the associate has an idea that this really is viable, they may be investing their time and effort in a practice without a future. If they really are thinking about purchasing the practice, they better know that practice area and know statistically, is it growing, is it shrinking, is it developing, and how? That's what the viability that an associate should know about a site. So buying or selling, starting up, or even getting a job for a place, having that demographic knowledge is important. And trust me, the worst thing in the world, and I hate this, people will come to me after the fact and go, why didn't I do this earlier? Why didn't I think about that? Having the facts and getting the orientation for it, well, it can be disastrous to be ignorant.
Absolutely. I have people that have reached out from, being a speaker in the community, in the industry, and people have said, we bought into this, $1 million practice. We purchased it. We everything looked great on the numbers. We got in, and then we realized that the town is shrinking by 5% every 3 years.
Yeah.
And that, there's too much competition, that we didn't think about the fact that, he was doing, ABCD services, and that is the demographic that is leaving the most from the population base. And, it's just all these things that would have been, I don't want to say it would have been simple to figure out prior, but it would have been simple if they had contacted somebody like you or someone who understood the demographics, because all those types of things would have shown up like a bright, big Batman signal in the sky, I would assume.
Wait, okay, and you just said something that's pretty important, Jonathan. Let me just jump on this like a duck on a June bug, which I know in Arkansas you guys use that expression. I'm kidding. All right.
We just shoot ducks.
There you go. Okay, now, Jonathan, here's the thing. There are people who say, oh, I got a demographic report. Well, that's wonderful. Look, I'm going to tell you something, little secret here. Data is not hard to get. You can get data from any place. Some of it's better than others, granted, but it's not the data that's important. It's understanding the value of the data. Mm-hmm. This, by the way, is something that you're particularly good at in your company, if you don't mind me giving you a little bit of a plug. It's more than just the numbers. It's what the meaning of the numbers is. And that's where people have a problem understanding if you have a production or a collection rate that is not really keeping up with your overhead, or the part of your overhead that's variable that you can change and economize on. People don't know that. And that's why what you do in helping your clients is so valuable. So if you have a number that you get on a demographic table and it shows that you've got a population per household of 2.4, is that good or is that bad? You see, you just know the number, but you don't know the meaning of the number.
Sure.
Now, interesting little orientation. If you happen to be in San Jose, California and Boise, Idaho, the population per household number is about the same. It's 3.5. But here's the thing you got to know. It's not the same in San Jose as it is in Boise. The reason the number is the way it is very different. In San Jose, you have a significant number of Asian American households that have multi-generational occupants. So it's mom and dad and the kids and grandparents all living in the same household. That doesn't happen nearly as much in Idaho. There, you just have a great big bunch of kids. And that's going to affect the production potential of a practice setting up in either location. Also will affect your marketing plan, what kind of an investment you ought to make in equipment and certain procedures. They'll be different in each location. So there's a clinical manifestation to the demographics.
Sure.
Don't you feel smarter now?
Oh, I do. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that puts a pin into the point that we've made so many times on the podcast, that it really, the amount of information that is out there now is amazing. Like there's people that say that every day on the internet there's more information put into the internet alone, content created, data put out there, than was created in the first 2,000, 3,000, however many years the written word has been around, just as a whole. But like you said, if you can't disseminate that and you can't put it into some type of terms for people to be able to understand, it's not going to make a whole heck of a lot of difference. And so I find a lot of people go out and they'll do the research, and they haven't been able to go in and actually study all these things at a very deep level, and they'll make assumptions based off of something posted somewhere, and they've triggered it in their mind that that's the number they were supposed to look for, and they have this validation whenever they see it somewhere else. And especially in doctor demographic reports, seems to be one of the most critical issues that I see people missing over and over and over and over again, is they don't understand what they really need to know about the demographics of the area. Like they understand they stop at the ratio.
Right.
That's like the limit of what they usually understand. When I have people speaking with me, they'll say, it's a great, it sounds like a great area. It's got, a 1,800 to 1 ratio. I know it could be better, but that sounds good to me. I'm ready to try and make it work. But they don't know anything about, who is that 1,800? Is that 50% people over 50? Is that, 20% under 30? What is that? What does that do? And what services do you offer in order to be able to make that happen? So give us a few of those examples. So, I mean, I could literally probably ask you about every demographic that I could think of, down to like, how many purple houses are in every town. But, to condense that for our listeners and to save you some time for all my questions, can you give us some of the, if I am a dentist that is either going to be acquiring a practice or starting a practice, and I'm starting to think, I believe most people probably think, First thought is, where do I want to live, is the first kind of thing on the checklist to look for. Is that the right thing to be thinking about when we're starting this process of where my practice is going to end up being?
Well, I am a believer that you have to have a particular life that you want to live, because your practice life is not separated from your regular life. Now, I say that within reason, because there are some people who are a little unreasonable about where they want to live. Now, let's just, bottom line is, if you happen to be a person who has a specific set of desirable things you want, in fact, I've talked to you about this little video that I do, and we'll take that into account. So yeah, your lifestyle, your desires, where you want to live, that does matter. Let me back up here and just kind of say a couple of facts about that. One of the reasons why people come to me and they say, I have to move where I am, is because there's been a disconnect between their life and their practice life. A lot of times they're leaving successful practices to leave, to go someplace else. Now, why would they do that? A lot of times it's silly things like divorce and custody. If you happen to have your kids living in a different state and you don't get to see them very often, well, that's going to make for a very difficult situation. It's not a thing you always have choice over, of where your kids are, but you have to take that into account. There are other things about, I want to practice a particular modality, and some places are not going to support some kinds of practices. That's a fact of life. Periodontal practices are sometimes difficult to have in rural areas. It's not that there's not a huge demand for or a clinical need, but the lifestyle doesn't often support it. So you get what I'm saying about that. You have certain procedures that you like to do or want to do. You want to be near a teaching place. That's another thing you have to take into account. But increasingly, we're seeing a second thing other than divorce and custody, and that happens to be your spouse is a professional as well. And often what you're trying to do is to keep two careers going within a community and not one. And if you are single, you're going to be available to go to some places and not available to go to others because, hey, you may want a social life. It could be that if you happen to be married but you have a professional spouse, the number of places they can go is limited too. So often we'll help figure out a place that's compatible for both. Now, those are the two big reasons why people move. Not why they go there originally, but why they move. And we have to take those things into account. Now, your general question is, what are the things that we ought to look for in demographics to determine where to go? And so the first thing I start off with is tell me something about yourself, what your goals are, your life, and all that. But next to that, we say, first of all, you have to have a sufficient patient base to support a practice. That above and beyond everything else, that has to be there. If you're in an area that has too small a population, you're going to be in trouble.
It's hard to build a practice in Antarctica.
That's true. It's hard. It's very, very hard. But you see, if you don't have sufficient people, no matter what's going to happen, you're in trouble. The same thing is true of growth. If you're thinking about doing any kind of startup or even a practice transition that doesn't have supporting growth going on in the area, you're going to have a hard life because the number of dentists operating within an area usually doesn't shrink. It usually at least remains stable. And if the population's going down, you're getting more and more competition, and that makes for things being difficult. Some parts of the country are just terrible to practice in. And I'll bet you're begging me to tell you what parts, huh? Would you like to know?
I'd like to guess. I would have to guess it's where the most, if you pulled up a Google list of most desirable places to live in the country, that would be the areas where it's getting the most competitive.
Well, no, Sperling's is a company that puts out a best places to live, best place to retire and stuff like that. Sperling's. Don't believe them. I mean, no offense, but they're basing their rationale entirely on different places. In fact, I get magazines every week on places that are trying to pitch me on where to recommend people to go.
Oh, yeah. Like the towns that have actually contacted the editors to say,
yeah, and they buy in.
We'll pay.
Don't trust them. Don't do that. No,
I'll tell you $5,000 for an advert to be on your top 10 list or whatever.
That's right. So look, don't go to Rhode Island and don't go to Connecticut. And you may go, why? It's because they're bleeding people. People want to get out of there. It's because the population is leaving because there's no employment, or employment is not great. Now, a lot of people don't recognize this. Do you know what state has the highest per capita income?
Highest per capita? I would have to. Well, I would definitely say that probably Silicon Valley would be the highest city, but I don't know about the state. What would it be?
Maryland.
Okay.
Maryland has the highest per capita income and median household income. It is really a place where there's lots and lots and lots of money. that doesn't mean it's necessarily the place to pick up and go, because one little myth that we were talking about, myths, is that rich people are always better patients than people who are middle class or poor.
Yeah.
As the Porgy and Bess musical says, tain't necessarily so, okay? The other thing is, by the way, a part of the state may be really terrific or really terrible. Doesn't mean the whole state is. But some of these states are, as by their nature, just having a hard time. So every year I publish the best places to go, the 10 places that I see the most thriving. And I also have the kiss of death sites, which is another thing I publish. And I actually name names. I have to be honest with you. You kind of need to know that there are some places that are just not going to work no matter how pleasant the doctor who's selling it might be, or how cheap the office is. Because the price of a practice is a little bit like a siren song. If you're not careful, you may get pulled onto the rocks by the sirens of, I have a cheap practice, and you don't want to do that. All right? So you have to take all that into account. My job is to help you figure that out. Where is going to be a good place that's going to have what you want? So I'm often looking at the sites, the states that have significant growth. And not just kind of growth, but significant growth. Now, there are 7 that actually have a higher than average birth rate. And you might kind of go, well, why would you care about birth rate? Well, here's the thing. There are 2 ways that an area grows. And forgive me if I get a little too technical here. 2. One is immigration. And I mean people moving from someplace else to here. That's immigration.
Sure.
The second one is birth rate. Now, if you look at Florida, a lot of people want to live in Florida. That's because Florida has beautiful weather, has relatively inexpensive homes you can acquire in many parts of it, on the east and west coasts,
Sure.
as well as inland, the Ocala and Orlando areas, Now, Orlando's got a high crime rate, so you kind of go a little mitigated, but Florida is very good for people moving from elsewhere. However, their birth rate is terrible.
Lots of retirees going to Florida, right?
That's right. They don't call it God's doorstep for nothing, right?
That's good.
Okay, so with that in mind, you say, all right, what are the places that have a high birth rate? Now, birth rate is particularly important if you're an orthodontist or a pediatric dentist, because you need to have a number of people who are, children who are present.
Sure.
Can you guess what state has the highest birth rate in the country?
I would think Utah would be pretty high.
Yes, Utah, the state I live in. You can't swing a dead cat without hitting a pregnant lady in this state. In fact, the state of Utah is thinking about legislation in which it would say that women should not have children after 35.
Really? Huh.
It said, 36 is too many. So we need to kind of pull back a little bit on the reins for the number of kids. Jonathan, that's a joke, okay?
Joke, okay.
I know. Arkansas, everybody's serious. I got that,
Well, you see all the conservative posts come up on the Facebook feed, and you're like, is this one real or is this one not real? So, I got you.
All right, it's a joke, but it does have
I don't want to go up against you on the poker tables. You delivered that one really well.
Okay, all right. Anyway, I just also tell you, the next highest state in birth rate is Texas. Now, Texas is very family friendly, and you may say, "Oh, is that a good thing?" Yeah, it's very good, and that's one reason why a lot of people are moving there. Another way to put it is called cultural congeniality. They're congenial to different lifestyles that family-friendly middle-class people want to do, and that's why Utah, Colorado, Texas, Oklahoma, even Georgia, Virginia, a lot of Virginia, very family-friendly, and that means that doctors who are in a family-type environment are likely to have success. There are some states that are really unfriendly, or communities that are very unfriendly to families with children. Now, I used to do a lot of work in San Francisco. If you happen to know 450 Sutter, I worked with almost everybody in that building at one time. The pediatric practices can't make a living in San Francisco very easily. There are a few, yes, I know. But for the most part, it's been named as the least family-friendly city in America. Because of that, those people who deal with a lot of children and adolescents have a hard time in the community as it's changed. These families have gone to other Bay Area cities, particularly in the East Bay, Contra Costa County, Alameda, and all that. So knowing that that's the case, if you have a particular practice type that you want, you have to know where can that population be found. Had a doctor who called me today who wants to do an endodontic practice on the west coast of Florida. And she was saying, I want to go here or here, what's better? And I'm helping her do that. I think it's a reasonable place to go, the two counties she's looking at. But you see, not every place is going to be as equally good based upon the demographics of the area. That makes sense, right?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So when you're looking for what do I need, if you have to start off with that big question, is the practice model I want or the kind of practice I'm in going to be supported by the number of people that are there? The tendency that they have to grow is always a positive indicator. Other factors that I like to take into account, as I've implied, one is age, one is income, and another is educational attainment. Now, please don't understand that I'm being a snob here, because there are a lot of wonderful people in the world who don't have a lot of money. Sure. They need good care too. But the practice model that you're going to have and apply to them is not going to be a fee-for-service practice. Therefore, finding the kind of practice that will fit the need for the population is just smart. And yes, I've got a lot of really good doctors who've gone to areas that have a predominantly poor population, and they have done very, very well. And there are places that do quite well with the affluent. But by the way, the practice that will work in a rich area isn't the same kind of practice that will work in a poor one.
Yeah, I completely understand that. I mean, as far as, just the person's personal calling to what they're driven to do has so much of an impact on success or failure in whatever it is. Because if you said, if the doctor has to be able to look introspectively enough to be able to say, yes, I do want to have that type of practice, or no, I don't want to have that type of practice. Basically, who do you want to hang out with for the next 40 years? I mean,
That's right. That's right. Now, remember, two practices can exist right next to each other, and they may serve an entirely different patient base. And knowing that and knowing the model or the people you want to go after will affect your marketing, your practice promotion, your image, and your clinical offerings. They're not going to be the same. So, and that helps a lot in your planning. What am I going to do? Where am I going to go? Can I introduce a concept to you real quickly, if you don't mind?
Sure, absolutely.
Now, are you familiar with the term psychographics?
Psychographics. I'm not familiar with that term.
Okay, I'm going to be very brief. It's actually a study that is related to demography. Now, demographics are how old people are, how much money they make, and all the things they do. Psychographics is a shorthand for what people do. What do they read? What do they watch? Where do they vacation? What do they think about dentistry? Now, there are companies like the Stanford Research Institute, SRI, back in the 70s created the first psychographic model of America. Now, they came up with 9 American lifestyles. A scholar there came up with that. Now, modern demographers have taken it further, and now there's about 65. Now, understand this, there are different companies that deal in different psychographic models, but they're discrete representations of the population. And if you happen to know what that is, you're going to be successful in identifying how to get those people into your practice. It's a way to reach out to people based on who they really are. So,
kind of like a Myers-Briggs test, but
no, actually, Myers-Briggs is based upon your personality. This has nothing to do with your personality and everything to do with your consumer potential.
Okay, yeah, that's a good way of saying it.
Okay, so when you look at, I'm going to give you 2 names. They don't use these anymore. They're very politically incorrect. One was called Shotguns and Pickups, and the other was the Leave It to Beavers. Now, I'm using these because they're not copyrighted anemaore. Now, the Shotguns and Pickups are the same age as the Leave It to Beavers. Okay. Both of the heads of household are college educated. Okay, I have to have you understand that. Now, the Shotguns and Pickups have a pickup. They also have the same number of children as the Leave It to Beavers. However, in the Shotguns and Pickups, the head of the household may often be a gray-collar or blue-collar skilled worker. In the Leave It to Beavers, he's probably a white-collar worker. Now, most of the dentists listening are thinking, oh, well, I want the Leave It to Beavers. You'd make a mistake if you just made some overall statement like that. By the way, Arkansas has a lot more of the Shotguns and Pickups.
Oh, yeah.
These
I
are
have
people.
A shotgun. I don't have a pickup, but.
Well, that's okay. You're still young.
I always dream.
Dream, baby. You know what I'm talking about? And we're not talking about just any old pick-em-up truck. You want one with the mud flaps, right?
Oh, yeah.
Four-wheel drive.
Get a nice lift on there.
Yeah, you have to buy a dog to walk around the back. You know what I'm talking about.
I got you. Yeah.
It's the Arkansas dream. So, but you see, those people have very different wants and needs than the Leave It to Beavers, even though they are basically the same age and even make very close to the same amount of money.
Mm-hmm.
They're relatively well educated too. But you see, where are the shotguns and pickups going to vacation? Well, they usually do an outdoors adventure. They'll camp or they'll hunt or they'll do something like that. Now, the Leave It to Beavers are going to tend to go to Disney World or Disneyland or a theme park. They're going to have a different ideal for what it is that they do with their time and money. Their kids are going to be pretty much the same age, but the kids are going to have slightly different dental needs and wants. Now, Wanda, who is the wife on the shotguns and pickups, is not going to be like June Cleaver in the Leave It to Beavers. They have different expectations where they're going to spend their money and spend their time. Knowing those things, if you know who is in your community, or you're looking for a community that will have a large number of that particular group, that is what it's going to take to succeed in your marketing and creating a practice model. Now, is everybody the same in every town in Arkansas? No. And you're going to find some, like in Little Rock, who are going to be Leave It to Beavers, and some are going to be shotguns and pickups, certainly. But you would be wise to know the distribution of that population in the area to make a decision on who are we going to go after? Where are we going to promote our practice? What themes are we going to use in our marketing? Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%.
Okay.
Absolutely.
That's what good market research does for you, is it will tell you who's there and how to get them. And as I mentioned, so what I did, I should say, is I went through my favorite vendors and I helped figure out what's the application of that lifestyle to dentistry. Now, I'll also tell you, I also work in veterinary medicine and urgent care and all that other kind of stuff. And each of the psychographic groups have a different manifestation. But you got to know who the people are. You also have to be very careful not to find yourself in a bigoted situation to say, oh, I don't like to work with those people.
Sure. Yeah. And I bet, like you're saying, the urgent care, I bet the shotgun and truck people are more likely to have some pretty big incidents around the house.
You're right, but why?
Because they're outside more, and you have more. Well, I guess there is that statistic that most accidents occur inside of the house, but you would think that maybe it's just because of the fact that they're more active outdoor compared to other places. That's what you're
thinking hunting accidents and all that. No, and that doesn't happen as often as you might think.
Mm-hmm.
The shotguns and pickups are not as inclined to plan ahead with their preventive care. That's why urgent care is more popular among them, because they like a walk-in environment.
Very interesting. Yep, makes sense.
Now, the Leave It to Beavers, usually mom and dad are both college educated and usually both employed. They have to schedule their time more closely, and therefore they have to plan when we're going to go to the doctor. And when they get a recall notice or they get somebody to tell them you got to come back in for hygiene or something, they tend to respond differently. That makes sense, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So you've introduced a lot of really interesting concepts that I know that I've got my audience sitting on the edge of their seats right now, just soaking everything in. I hope everyone out there has I'm actually going to, in the intro, I'm going to recommend everyone get a pencil and paper out to start taking notes on this, because it's really interesting stuff. And literally the human psyche is the limit of what we could talk about today, it sounds like. But, if there's someone out there and there's another question they have in their head to say, maybe I would like to ask Scott this type of question, what is the best way for them to be able to get in contact with you?
Okay, well, let me always recommend drdemographics.com.
Mm-hmm.
It's my website, and I have little videos of me looking a lot like I do here on your screen, kind of explaining what our products are. We only have just a very limited number of product types.
Mm-hmm.
And they're usually directed toward what people's specific needs are. So, you can go through this kind of a thing. Do you mind if I just go through real quick? I mean, I won't.
Yeah, sure. We're a little close on time. Yeah, you can go ahead.
Okay. Well, real quick. First thing is, if you have one site you're looking at, or you're trying to compare two sites, we have a community overview report. So you give us a street address, you give me the cross streets. I can tell you the viability of a practice if you tell me about what you're trying to do there. The other is a best sites report, where if you have a large area, multiple counties, and you're trying to say, where do I go? We can actually tell you where are the 5 sites that will most closely match what you're trying to do. Now, a lot of people do the community overview thing where they're telling you about sites. Almost nobody does this thing where you're doing a best sites type thing. That's because a lot of analysts don't have the knowledge of the area, of the community. We have a marketing report in which we can tell you who's there and how to get them. And the last thing is I do telephone consultations. So if anybody has any questions at all and they want to know where do babies come from, and what I'll talk to them for half an hour on the phone about how to do it. So those are the 4 things I do. The expectation is I'm trying to answer questions that doctors have, and try to put it in a language and in terms that will answer their needs, as opposed to having me say, oh, this is definitely the place to go, based on my priorities and not yours.
Sure.
So that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
Very, very cool. Well, guys, I 100% recommend, I think you are crazy if you are going to start a practice and you don't have a demographics report done by someone other than your intuition. That you wouldn't believe how many times I get calls of people to say, I'm just going to do it. I think that like, this is as important as your malpractice insurance. This is insurance on your next 40 years of the biggest investment you guys are ever going to make, whether that be a startup practice or an acquisition, whatever it is. If you're going to be starting as a practice owner, you have to do this. So guys, I highly recommend you reach out to Scott, say, thank you for coming on the podcast and for giving so much information. I'm sure you've opened a few people's eyes to the power of actually what demographics can do for this giant investment. So thanks again so much for coming on, and thanks for being a friend of the podcast.
Okay, one quick. If you have any students that are saying, hey, could you come address my class? I do free podcasts and webinars. So, if somebody says, I'm in Georgia or whatever, could you do something for my class? I do that for nothing. Be happy to help.
Perfect. All right, you heard it. You hear it first, guys. If you're a dental student and this is something that is interesting to you, get Scott on the line. So, guys, thanks so much again, Scott, and everyone have a great day. A special thanks to Scott for sharing his amazing insights into the science of the demographics. Now, out of all the things we cover on the SYDP, your location is one of the most important things to get right. It is incredibly crucial. So, as Scott mentioned today, it's not the data that matters, but rather what you do with it. So, as a bonus for today, Scott has graciously shared his 3 steps to choosing the right location for your dental practice video guide. Now, I've watched it. It definitely took a lot of notes. I definitely took a lot of notes. I know you'll get a lot out of it, even if you're happy with where you're at. So to get that bonus, simply text practice to 33444. Again, that's practice to 33444, or visit startyourdentalpractice.com/bonus if you're outside of the U.S. You'll also receive updates on the latest episodes of Start Your Dental Practice, helpful tips for owning and running a practice, and promotional opportunities direct to your inbox. So that's it for today's episode, but that doesn't mean that the learning and implementation have to stop there. I've created a free report called The 15 Numbers That Will Make or Break Your Dental Practice. This report has been downloaded over 1,000 times by dental professionals. So if you want your free copy of this report that's going to outline what the most important numbers are in any dental practice, and it also includes how to look at your numbers, how to set goals, has a whole slew of really important information that is the culmination of all of my experience as a dental CPA, then just go to startyourdentalpractice.com/free gift. That is startyourdentalpractice.com/free gift. And so that's it for today, Ambitious Dentist. Again, I'm Jonathan Van Horn, CPA and ABV. I'll see you next week with another world-class practice owner or consultant that will help you start your very own dental practice. Thank you guys so much for being a part of the Start Your Dental Practice community. If you enjoyed today's episode, please do me a favor and go to startyourdentalpractice.com/iTunes to leave your honest feedback and review on iTunes. It's going to help me create a better experience, a better show, a better podcast for you, the ambitious dentist. Your feedback really does help, regardless if you like the show today or not. If you didn't like the show, let me know, because it's going to help me create a better show and podcast for you. Lastly, if you know of anybody that would
benefit from today's episode and today's content, today's guest, please feel free to share with them on social media or through email.